With falcon sight, we choose our foes. On falcon wings, we harry them. With falcon claws, we smite our foes. And with falcon tenacity, we win. In theory, a command economy would seem like an ideal clan solution for creating a production network. Naturally, an ideal number of raw materials would be produced to meet the needs of factories which produced intermediary goods that would go on to be the parts needed to produce final products. Once the number of each is settled upon, word goes out and the system works as intended, right? Workers are rewarded based upon meeting quotas, and restrictions or punishments meted out for waste or overproduction of unneeded goods. Meanwhile, a bevy of regulators could constantly keep tabs on production levels in order to make sure that there were no inefficiencies. Now, what works in principle may be tougher in reality. The calculations necessary for keeping even a moderate-sized economic system running were overwhelming to 20th century thinkers like F.A. Hayek and Lionel Robbins, to the point that eventually many advocates of command economies fell back onto advocating for trial and error to try to keep their systems functioning when a million different variables were in play. Now, looking at the clan economic system, let's say Clan Jade Falcon, for example, now we're drastically compounding the challenge of dealing with production of raw materials, intermediary goods, and final production lines across dozens, if not hundreds of planets and orbiting bodies at a time. It would be a logistical nightmare to try and somehow fine-tune such an economy to avoid waste. Add in the fact that many of the workers of the inner-sphere planets, controlled by the Falcons, were not willing participants in the system. Joe Smith, who was accustomed to receiving a weekly wage for working at a steel plant, may not want to shift to a system where you get an allotment of food stamps and a proverbial head pat for your effort. Local managers may start selling goods on the black market or buying them to help fill in shortfalls. All of these individual actions may help to either stabilize, but more often destabilize, any attempt to create a command equilibrium of inputs and outputs. It's a system rife with inherent instabilities, or as Murray Ann Rothbard put it, another grievous flaw in the Lang model is thinking that general equilibrium, a world of certainty where there is no room for the driving force of entrepreneurship, can somehow be used to depict the real world. The actual world is not one of changeless givens, but of incessant change and systemic uncertainty. So the Jade Falcons, even after more than 100 years of dominion over some of these planets in their occupation zone, were running into the same issues that central planners had run into way back in the 20th century. They couldn't perfect a system too complex to command. By the 3080s, the flaws in that planning were physically piling up in depots and warehouses all across Jade Falcon space. Reports began to pour in with complaints about parts deliveries sitting stagnant for months or even years. Out of desperation, and partially to avoid having to report a reduction in production quotas, some individuals within the Falcon leadership decided to find a way to use the resources they had to create a new product. Specifically, large amounts of Summoner and Hellbringer repair parts were sitting on the books, so engineers were tasked with taking what they had to cobble together a new BattleMech. Looking at existing lines of production, an aging Thunderbolt assembly line on Sudetan was identified as a possible option. Taking that original Thunderbolt chassis and using the Summoner and Hellbringer's surplus parts, a Frankenstein's monster of a BattleMech was created. Pushing the mech's weight up to 70 tons to compensate for the Summoner parts, the Thunderbolt 2C prototype resembled all three BattleMechs in various ways. We could go down the list of all the parts that belong to each BattleMech, but you're probably still in shock from the unexpected economics lesson, so we'll be brief. The Redline 350 XL engine is the same that's found in the Summoner, so the Thunderbolt 2C matches the Summoner's top speed of 86 km per hour. The Hawkeye 58 targeting and tracking system is from the Hellbringer, so one can expect a superior management of the mech's weaponry when push comes to shove. Interestingly, the life support system was pulled from an oversupply of systems originally intended for the Turkina BattleMech. With 13.5 tons of Forging Omni H-24 armor, the mech has good coverage and protection as it was intended to fill the role of being kind of a heavy-hitting brawler. Being a product of the 3080s, effort was put into reinforcing the actuators of the mech, specifically on the legs, to reduce the effectiveness of swarming, infantry, and battle armor attacks. It had the added benefit of making the mech appear bulkier and thus more intimidating. Initial plans included a powerful energy weapon in one of the mech's arms. Still working with the theme of use what you have, Those plans were adapted around the availability of surplus Series 16A improved heavy lasers produced on Sudeten by Olivetti Weaponry. So instead of one powerful energy weapon, the Thunderbolt 2C receives two, one in each arm. These large improved heavy lasers pack a 16 damage punch at a max distance of 15 hexes. However, the cost is paid for with incredible heat generation of 18 per shot. Thankfully, the improved heavy lasers don't include the -1 to hit penalty for normal heavy lasers. Unfortunately, the use of poor shielding around the massive laser capacitors will result in the weapon exploding if critically hit. The damage done is half the heavy laser's damage output. In the case of the large improved heavy laser, that would be 9. Thankfully, as a clan design, the Thunderbolt 2C benefits from case, which will prevent those explosions from damaging the neighboring torso. In addition to the two improved heavy large lasers, the Thunderbolt 2C was given a Type 15S Streak LRM-15 launcher in the right torso. While the weapon does benefit from the Streak technology, the launchers are heavy, twice the weight of a normal LRM-15. They cannot use special ammunition types and cannot benefit from any other aim assist technology. Oh, and they also cannot be used for indirect fire. If you're considering using this battle mech, one has to consider the benefits and drawbacks of that system. I'm not going to say it's good or bad, however, for 9 tons plus another half ton dedicated to Case 2, I personally would have gone another direction if I were looking to add missiles to the Thunderbolt 2C. While not explicitly stated in the records, this could be another example of using whatever they had on hand. Finally, the last of the open tonnage on the mech is dedicated to 3 Series 7 JA extended range medium lasers, which are placed in the left torso. While this loadout is vaguely similar to the original Thunderbolt, a glaring flaw in the design is the amount of heat management needed to keep it in the fight. There are 17 double heat sinks on this mech. If you alpha striked, which you should never do in this thing, you would generate 56 heat. Because I attended public schools, I can use a calculator to subtract 34 from 56 and get 22 excess heat. While you can avoid a shutdown on an 8+ on that, it's probably not a good idea to do unless you're planning on going out in a blaze of glory. Now, you might be saying, yeah, just don't alpha strike and you're fine. If you are, thank you for being a convenient conduit for my next point, which is that even firing just the 2 large improved heavy lasers is enough to end up with +2 heat per turn. Now you can do that for a few turns, but remember once you hit that 8+ heat, that's a +1 to hit modifier that's coming your way. The final result with the Thunderbolt 2C is a 70-ton battle mech that can hit pretty hard, but also has to deal with some pretty significant issues due to the loadout and lack of heat dissipation. The first units were distributed to Jade Falcon's second line units with the express instructions to keep detailed logs concerning any issues or strange happenings with the mech systems. The fact that the parts were not specifically designed to work together plagued the designers who wanted to chase down bugs and any gremlins in the system. Looking at the standard Thunderbolt 2C, it's not a bad mech. It's just weighed down by a woeful lack of heat sinks for the primary weapons. If I were looking to fix it, I would drop that Streak LRM-15 down to a standard LRM-15 and add 3 additional double heat sinks. That would go a long way to making this mech much deadlier on the battlefield. There's one variant of the Thunderbolt 2C which does significantly alter the mech. The most significant change is a step down to a standard 280 engine. While this does limit the mech's speed, it makes it much more resilient to incoming fire. A heavy-duty gyro is added along with an ECM suite to help improve the mech's lifespan in battle. Jump jets are also added to improve mobility and to compensate partially for the downgraded engine. I'm going to go ahead and put up the record sheet I had to create for this one since there's no official one yet available for the Thunderbolt 2C2. The weapons are stripped from the original and replaced with an ER large pulse laser in the right arm, a heavy large laser in the right torso, 3 standard medium pulse lasers in the left torso, and a small pulse laser in the left arm. Even with the +1 on the to-hit roll from the standard heavy large laser, I think I prefer this to the original variant. There are 2 fewer heat sinks, which doesn't really help with the heat situation, but the ER large pulse laser is going to be doing consistently good work, with the heavy large laser a sometimes backup weapon for the mid-range. Though it doesn't have a shoulder-mounted missile system that would scream Thunderbolt, to me it feels much more Thunderbolty. Is that a word? Well, it is now. It feels much more Thunderbolty than the original 2C loadout. Plus, you don't have to worry about your arms blowing up. The jump jets are a good addition, and the standard engine will help keep the mech on the field and in the fight for longer. If you're going to take the Thunderbolt 2C into battle, go with the variant 2. If you need a record sheet for it, I've included a Dropbox link for one in the video comments below. Otherwise, the original Thunderbolt 2C record sheet can be found on FlexSheet's website, which I've also linked in the video notes. As far as Il-Clan era sightings go, I wasn't able to find any mention of it beyond the 3085 release of the mech. It's quite possible that the Thunderbolt 2C has been the casualty of larger events and the almost complete demise of Clan Jade Falcon. I'm going to keep an eye on Sudaten, as whoever ends up with control over that planet as we move deeper into the Il-Clan era is going to have access to a pretty solid 2C design. It's quite possible, though I hope it isn't true, that this mech, along with its litany of design quirks, may have been lost to history. Overall, I'd say give the Thunderbolt 2C a try, especially the second variant. I think it's a neat mech with an interesting backstory that highlights some of the nitty-gritty intricacies of the BattleTech universe. What do you think of the Thunderbolt 2C? Did you even know it existed? How would you tweak that original loadout to make it better? Let me know in the comments below. Big thanks for hitting the like and subscribe buttons. The YouTube algorithm must be fed, lest it become angry and spiteful. Going the extra step to becoming a channel member goes a long way, as each of these videos takes roughly 12 hours of writing, recording, photoshopping, and editing to get to you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Until next time, take care and go make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.